Hello everyone, WTR here with a nice kind of quick retro view on some Godzilla bendy figures. Now, some people might not be familiar with bendies, largely because I don't think you see them that much in retail or anything, but during the 90s they had like a ton of these out for virtually every series. Now, as you'll see, these came out in 1994. They were put out by Trendmasters in co-partnership with Toho Corporation, which, made the Godzilla films. In particular, we'll be looking at Godzilla and Ghidorah, or King Ghidorah. A little shaky in the pronunciation. He's one of my favorite Godzilla villains, though. In general, as a kid, I had friends who were into Godzilla, and, if you had friends who were into something, by proxy, you were kind of into it, so... I did kind of like several of the characters, but a lot of the ones I liked just never really caught on, like Biollante and stuff. But for those of you not familiar with bendy figures, these were great just because at one point you didn't have like a terrible amount of articulation with figures, and you were lucky if you had like legs and arms that would move and stuff, but because these were bendy and stuff, you had all sorts of additional points, like you'd get them to work at the elbows and at the knees and everything, although, by the mid-90s we were seeing a lot of figures that did have similar articulation, but it really shone for parts like the tail here, where you can get all sorts of crazy poses that you wouldn't be able to get with like traditional figures, no matter what kind of articulation you have given them at that point. The articulation really shines through on Gidora here, where, he has his bendy necks and stuff, so you can get some really cool-looking flight poses, and his flailing stuff, and, just works out really cool. Especially because you can move him at any point of the neck, as opposed to other ones where, you'd have a few segments articulated. Really neat. Now, the one downside to the whole bendy stuff is the fact that they had a really huge tendency for the paint to chip and crap. Just because, I don't think the material sort of held it as well. Plus, whereas it was expected to move all over the place, it did have a, greater than average tendency to kind of chip in those areas. Which, is kind of a small sacrifice. Now, if you're not familiar with Godzilla, which, you probably are, he, of course, is a giant mutated lizard created by, I think it was atomic bomb testing, and, originally he was just sort of a, I guess, kind of cheap science fiction villain type, which is more or less to promote, like, the whole we shouldn't be doing stuff, we should be careful with this and that, because otherwise stuff like Godzilla might happen. But after that he kind of evolves as a character, and is portrayed as more of a combatant, and it went away from a whole eco-friendly sort of scope, or like science combating like the downfall of science or whatever, to just being more general monster fighting friendly and stuff. Now, King Ghidorah, probably one of the biggest antagonists in the series. His first appearance, I think it was like in the 60s. Basically, he had to have Mothra, Godzilla, and Rodan team up against him to beat him, and, he kept coming back throughout the series, and at one point had, like, cybernetic parts for some reason. Now, these figures just don't have a tremendous amount of paintwork or anything to them. You'll notice that it looks like they have like shading and stuff in parts, but I think a lot of it's probably just shadows within the sculpt as opposed to actual paint. It's kind of hard to tell though. Then of course originally he had silver all along the back here, but it's kind of faded with time. Paint-wise, Gidora looks even cheaper. I think they just use like two tones for just the gold and the red, and then I think a slightly different one for the teeth. And again, most of this front part's just fading where the paint scraped off. But I mean, out of the two, Gidora does seem like the cooler one just because there's more you can actually do with him. The articulation is a lot neater. Gidora was also one of my favorite monsters from the franchise just because, I mean, come on, look at him. He's a three-headed dragon thing, super strong and everything, just really neat overall. Again, the fact that his necks all have this really cool bendy motion and stuff, just makes him much nicer item than the Godzilla here. Of course, if you're a fan of Godzilla or whatever, there are literally millions of different figures available for these guys, done in all sorts of scales. I have a smaller Space Godzilla here, for instance, and then, they did larger ones with sound effects. Then they did the American Godzilla movie, which I understand isn't terribly popular, although I did like the redesign for that. I mean, he had his own figure line as well, so, just a kind of neat little item. One downside is, the forward motion just isn't really there for the legs on these. You'll notice a cut here, but, it's just you can't get the legs to ever really face forward like that, and then you'll notice little drill marks and stuff just to accommodate for when the plastic's moving. And of course, with material like this, it does sort of wear over time, and, use eventually will lead to it possibly snapping or something. I mean, all in all, pretty cool little item. I just had lying around, thought I'd pick them up, review them, or take them out of a container or whatever. So yeah, this is me look at Godzilla and King Ghidorah from the, was it Trendmasters Bendy series, produced in 1994. Until next time, folks.